Good afternoon, those of you who are just coming in. I keep hitting the wrong button. Hello, good afternoon.
Oh, bro, this computer be doing the most.
Good afternoon. Hello, hello. I'm going to go ahead and post the link to the Nearpod here. So you can go ahead and begin the journal entries for those of you who are already here. Okay. So there you go. For those of you who are already here, you can go ahead and begin working on your journal entries. Thank you, Ms. Beck, about Red Ribbon Week pictures for Yearbook Club. So if you would like to submit your Red Ribbon Week pictures, there's the link to do so. And then here again is the Nearpod so that you can begin doing your journal entry for this class. All right, again, here is the link to the Nearpod for those of you who are just joining us. Go ahead and jump on in. You can start to work on your journal entries or your journal entry for today. Hello, hello, everybody who's just joining us. It is time for us to begin. So those of you who can, please go ahead and turn on your cameras so I can officially mark you as present. And then again, I'm going to go ahead and put the Nearpod right there for you. So open up the Nearpod, turn on your camera. Those of you who are at school, Austin, Joshua, once I have seen you, you can go ahead and turn your cameras back off. Thank you. Jaden, I see that you are at school. You can also turn yours back off. Yolanda, I think you're at school. You can also turn yours back off, especially if Jordan, thank you. Especially if it makes it so that you can't hear me. It's more important for you to be able to hear and see what's going on. That's for sure. Picked up a couple more people. Hello, hello, hello. Just a quick reminder, if you did not take or did not get a good grade on your history test, it is now open again for submissions. So you can go ahead and turn that in. Please do that sooner rather than later so that I can begin to fix some grades and so that we can get a good idea of where you're at in the class before we get to our second summative, right? Okay. So we want to go ahead and get that done as soon as you can. I don't want you to be working on your next summative and then you have the test still like hanging over your head and you're having to juggle both of them, okay? So please go ahead and get that first summative taken care of as soon as you can. All right, I think here again is the Nearpod link. Please go ahead and open that up and 2 more minutes and then we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm just checking attendance. Making sure that I didn't miss anybody. Okay. Again, one more time. There's the Nearpod. Okay, 2 more minutes. So you work on your journal, and then we're going to go ahead and get started on Elizabethan theater. But I do want to remind you, if you did not take the history test or you did not get a good score on the history test, please take or retake that as soon as possible. If you want to take it with me, you can come to my office hour. Don't use this time to take it because we're moving on to other things. But if you need to get it done, please do so. Remember that you guys now have no penalty for retakes, okay? So there's no harm in taking it as many times as you need to. Right now I have it set to 3 times, but if you need to take it more than that, you just need to let me know and I can open it up for more attempts if necessary, okay? I just started with 3. All right, let's go ahead and move on. I'm assuming that we are, oh, sure. Here is the Nearpod link for everyone who is just coming in. There is also a version of this in Schoology. So if you need to go back, now that we've started class, if you could pause for a moment on the red ribbon week picture thing, that'd be great, Ms. Beck. But yeah, here's the Nearpod link. If you need to work on your journal later, you can always find the presentation in Schoology. All right. So today we're going to talk about Elizabethan theater. And before we get started, I would like you to go ahead and watch this little video. It's only about 2 minutes. So go ahead and hit play and we'll come back in about 2.5 minutes to talk about it. Okay, so what did we get from that video? Tell me what you saw. Those of you who are able to watch it. Okay, we learned that school Wi-Fi was trash. That guy had a lot of wives. Okay, yes, that's true. Okay. If you weren't able to watch the video, it's not a big deal. It's just this guy ruined his wife's life. He killed most of them, a lot of wives. Yes. Okay. So the point of the video is it's about this series is called Horrible Histories. Do you guys know anything about Schoolhouse Rock? Yes. Okay. So Horrible Histories is kind of like the British version of Schoolhouse Rock, but they go ahead and like look through the history of their country and like talk about all these like rulers like Henry VIII who did all this really like underhanded stuff, right? So the purpose of this is because Henry VIII essentially is responsible for he is responsible for creating the Church of England, which is still the official church of England to this day. Okay. Um, so essentially, what happened was England was a Catholic country, right? You guys remember when we talked about medieval theater? What was the purpose of doing theater in the medieval period? Like, what were they using it for? Religion, right? To teach religion. Yes, exactly. Good, good. So they're using theater to teach religion. Henry VIII comes to power, and it's a Catholic nation, right? Well, he's married to Catherine, and she is not able to give him a son. So he writes to the Pope and he requests a divorce, right? And the Pope tells him no, right? The Pope's like, no, absolutely not. Like, she's your wife by law. Like, that's that. Sorry. So Henry VIII's response, as you can see on the Nearpod, is to create the Anglican Church, also known as the Church of England. Essentially, he made it so that he could give himself the permission to get a divorce. Right? So he divorced and beheaded his first two wives, right? So he divorces his first wife. He marries Anne Boleyn, and his daughter with Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth, is going to grow up to be Elizabeth the First, right? Then Anne, he sort of accuses her of being unfaithful, has her killed. He marries another woman. They have a child, but then she dies, right? He marries another woman. She's not what he expected, so he divorces her. He marries another woman. He has her beheaded again for being unfaithful. And then the last one outlives him, right? Why would he just kill them? Or do you mean why wouldn't he? Oh, well, it's basically because it was this idea that, like everybody knew that these women were unfaithful. And so, yeah, she was charged with treason. Exactly. Yeah. She like, they they made up these stories so that essentially he could have an excuse to have them beheaded pretty much. So that's that. But so this gives you an idea of sort of the environment that Elizabeth comes into. She comes into power. It's a very messy time. Her dad had done all these things. She's a woman, right? She's unmarried. Her sister also there's all these problems with her sister Mary. Eventually, her sister Mary gets locked in the Tower of London. And so it's a very sort of tumultuous time, especially when it comes to the relationship between people who were Catholic and people who were now following the Anglican Church. As you can imagine, like forcing a bunch of people to convert to a new religion, it doesn't exactly go super well, right? So, this leads us to some rules that are going to be applied to the Elizabethan stage. Let's see. Ethan, why don't you read this slide for us?
Rules for the Elizabethan stage. No female actors, no biblical figures allowed on stage. Public theaters were affordable, and private theaters were more expensive and exclusive.
Perfect. Okay, so no female actors. Now, if you remember, we did have some female actors in the medieval period. What characters were women allowed to play during medieval period? There are a couple very specific characters. Nope, women weren't allowed to play men. Maids, no. There's like some specific things that, some specific characters from the Bible that they wanted women to play. We didn't have any nuns yet, but you're headed in the right direction. So who's like the number one female character in the Bible? Mary, Eve. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. So we needed to have women to play these very important characters who were female, right? Mary, Eve, any female saints that were specifically mentioned, Mary Magdalene, right? But that's pretty much all that women were allowed to play. So now we're going back to the idea that now that theater isn't religious, then women should not be on stage. Okay. So we've taken a tiny step backward where that's concerned. All right, good. What about why do you think, based on what we just talked about the church and the religious situation, why do you think they would ban biblical figures from the stage? Religious belief, says Jordan. Yep, that's part of it for sure. What do they want to like cut down on? So they didn't have as much influence. Yes, sort of. Yeah. The idea was to keep it very separate, right? We don't want to have the theater teaching anything that the church doesn't have direct influence over now, right? So, because the Anglican Church is very new, because this whole situation's pretty unstable, it's just like, nope, we got to keep the two totally separate. The church is one thing, and theater is entertainment, and it's something completely different. Okay? So, a total 180, really, from what we dealt with medieval theater, right? And then we have public theaters and we have private theaters. And we're going to go into more detail with these two things in just a second. Okay, so think about the situation that Elizabeth was in at the time. Do you agree with her decision to ban biblical figures from the stage? What do you think? So we've got some yeses, we've got some nos. It's on the Nearpod. If you can't see the Nearpod, Cortland, here it is. What was the, like, do you agree with Elizabeth's choice to ban biblical figures from the stage? Thinking about the situation that she was in, do you think it was the right choice? Trying to find a picture of the globe while we. Okay, so let's see. We're pretty split. About 50% of people are saying no, they don't agree. So those of you who don't agree, tell me why you don't agree with it. Try to remember the situation that she's in at the time, too. She could have kept it, but I don't think she should have banned it. Okay. What else? Get a lot of no's. So that's fine if you don't agree with it. I just want you to tell me why you don't think it was a smart decision. How about somebody who thought it was right? Let's see. Jaden, you tell me why you think it was right. It was smart of her to do that. You can come off mute too if you don't want to type it in the chat. That's fine too. It was right because like they said, theater's entertainment. Okay. It was really in her own self-interest, right? To try to keep any problems between the people who wanted to stay Catholic and the people who had converted to the Anglican Church. It was also pretty well known that there were lots of people who were having these like underground Catholic services that were still going on, right? So as long as they weren't doing it publicly, it was kind of like this like, we know it's happening, but we're going to try to like not acknowledge it sort of deal, right? Okay. And by putting it on stage, that makes it impossible to ignore. Okay. So it's kind of one of those things where it was definitely in her own self-interest to make this a policy, right? It protected her more than it did help anybody else. Okay. All right. The first public, Jaden says, I chose yes because they're trying, influence was meant for entertainment. Yeah. And entertainment does influence people's opinions, right? We can use the theater to like sway people's opinions. All right. Let's see. Who would like to read this slide? Does anybody want to volunteer? It's a short one. It's not scary.
The first public theater.
Thank you, Ethan.
James Burbage built theater in 1576. The lumber for theater was used to build the globe after Elizabeth I banned theaters from the city limits of London.
Yes. Okay. So I want to show you guys a map. And if you want to keep this map handy, you can. Let me. here we are. So here's here, I'll just share my screen real quick so you don't have to switch anything. Okay, so take a look at this. Here we have, you see this brown thing? That's the city wall, right? So that's really sort of defines the majority of the like the city of London, right? The prime like city of London is in this area. The other border of it is at the south, which is the Thames, right? The river here. And you can see there's the London's Bridge and there's Paul's Wharf, right? So the original theater that James Burbage built, which was called Theater, was sort of like right around here. Okay, can you see the little orange dot I just put on there? And so it was in the like city London proper. Well, this area sort of in this place by Paul's Wharf became known for not some great, like it wasn't really a great area town. It became known for some sort of negative stuff. There were lots of like sketchy people around there. There were lots of brothels and all sorts of stuff going down. And a lot of the people who were in the government at the time blamed the theater itself, right? Because remember, this is the first one. They blamed the theater itself for the problems there. Of course, that wasn't really it, but whatever. You know, they had to blame somebody. So as a result, Elizabeth says that they're going to ban public theaters from within the city limits of London. So what do? Well, they take basically all the lumber and they take it down like piece by piece. They put it on a barge. They take it just like across the river. And right here is where they put it back together and they make the globe. So they just take all the lumber from it, take it across the river and rebuild. But guess what? Now it's outside the city limits and it's still accessible across the London Bridge, right? And you can take little like boats back and forth. So they're not breaking the law. But it's still very close to its original location. So keep that map up as we go through this because we're going to talk about a few of these other theaters, okay? And you can see them right on this map. So, yeah, so basically they just deconstructed it, took it over the Thames, reconstructed it. Now it's the globe. Can you take a screenshot? You can if you want. Or here, I can post there's the image for you if you want to just use that. You're welcome. Okay, good. Okay, so let's talk about the globe itself. Aaliyah, can you read this slide for us, please?
Sure. The globe held over 3,000 people. Admission was only 1 penny, frequently closed during plagues. Thatched roof caused it to burn down in 1613.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so when I say that we know that Shakespeare's plays were written to really appeal to everyone, it's because of what this theater actually looked like and the content of the plays themselves. So this is what the globe that the Royal Shakespeare Theatre performs in today. This is their sort of reconstruction of the globe. Now, these penny seats, these cheap seats, they were these people here who basically would stand, right? You can see there's no chairs really. They would stand to watch the entire performance. And I'm going to put it in the chat just because I know I'm sort of muffled. They were called the groundlings, right? Cheap seats, you could stand, but you could watch the show. You could get in for just a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of money, right? If you had a little bit more money, you could sit here. There, you could actually sit to watch the show. There were benches, right? They were elevated a little bit. You'd still be very close to the groundlings. So you're still probably only like slightly better off than the people who are paying just like a pence to get in, right? But you get a seat. You have slightly more money. Here you are, the second row. Maybe you're a merchant, you know, you're up and coming. You get to sit up here. You get to be sort of away from all those commoners. And then the third row would be for people who were, you know, upper class, lords, ladies, right? People who did not want to really be associated with those sort of lower class people down here. What else do you see about the globe from this picture? We talked about the thatched roof, right? So here's the thatched roof. But what else is going on with the roof? It's open. Yes, it's sloped inwards. It doesn't cover the middle. Yes. Okay, so let me show you a couple more pictures so you can get kind of a better angle of that. Let's see, that one's not one. Let's go to. That wasn't a very smart Google search, was it? Okay. So here you can kind of see, right? We have this large, we have a house that's on stage, and we have a large portion of the inner yard that is completely vulnerable to the elements, right? Here you can kind of see it, right? So the majority of it, here's a sketch of it, is completely open to the elements. Okay, that's going to come in hand. That's going to be important when we talk about private theaters and why private theaters were necessary. Okay. So during the plagues, they would close it down. Why? Well, as you can imagine, just like we're dealing with now, the last thing that you really want to do when you're in the middle of a plague is to cram 3,000 people who have no idea like what sanitation is into a theater to watch a play, right? So they would close them very often. So yeah, it burned down in 1613. And if you look back at that map, do you see like a little bit north of the globe, you see the rose? That's sort of what's going to come next. That'll be the next big open air theater after the globe burns down. Okay. So similar to medieval theater, do you remember how we talked about all of those special effects that they used in medieval theater? Most of those stick around, right? They're still using the smoke. They're still using trapdoors. They're still using all that fun stuff. They're also using a thing called a thunder run, which is kind of like, you know, like the gutters at a bowling alley. It's kind of like that, but you would roll a cannonball down it to make like a sound like thunder rumbling. The theater, the globe actually burns down because of a special effect. They were lighting a cannon for like a war scene. I want to say it was for Richard III, but I'm not entirely sure. And you know, it goes off, it lights the roof on fire, and then, you know, the whole thing's made of wood, so it just very quickly burns to the ground, right? As you can see, though, from those pictures that I showed you, they use very minimal scenery. And we know that because of what Shakespeare himself wrote. He talks about in a lot of his plays that the audience has to use their imagination to really fill out what they can't put on stage. So they might bring out like one little tree, you know, in a pot and like put it on stage and tell you like we're in a forest, and now you have to use your imagination to kind of like fill that in, right? And the little tree is just there to remind you, oh yeah, we're in a forest. Okay. So types of theaters. Who hasn't read in a while? Justice. Why don't you go ahead and read this slide for us?
Types of theaters. Public, open in the summer, able to sit thousands, the Globe, affordable. Private, open in the winter, could sit only a few hundred, Blackfriars, expensive and exclusive.
Yes, good. Okay, so we've talked about the Globe, right? About how it was, open to the air. What are some reasons why they would need a private theater in the winter? The weather. Yes, Yolanda. Yep, that's a big one. The weather, right? If you know anything about London, the weather's not very nice during the winter time, right? But if it's expensive and exclusive, who is it that's still going to the theater? Yeah, Delilah, it's cold and they may not be able to keep everyone warm. Yep, that's a big part of it too. But yeah, who wants to go to the theater still? It's expensive, it's exclusive, only people who have good money. The king, well, right now we have a queen, right? Yeah, exactly, Jaden. Good. Yeah, right? The upper class, the upper members of society, they're the ones who they have the money to burn, right? They want to see theater still. The rich people. Yes, exactly. Now, Blackfriars, if you look on your map, if you look at where it says River Thames, the I in river goes straight north, and you see this little like red area, that's Blackfriars. Okay. So, Blackfriars, what does that remind you of? What is a friar? Anybody know? Fried food? No, but a decent guess. Go ahead and look it up if you don't know. An old robe or something? Where they wore robes? Okay, Victoria says someone of the church. Yolanda's looked it up. Okay, so remember what I said about what happened with religion, right? They basically had these religious buildings that were in the city of London that were no longer being used because it wasn't Catholic anymore, right? So the monastery sort of becomes property of the king, and he begins to decide like what he wants to use it for. And think about it this way, it's a church, right? So it already has a place for people to sit. It already has a place for, like an altar where like a service would occur that everybody looks at. Okay. So it's already kind of set up like a theater. And so they end up using it as one of the private theaters for wintertime performances. Okay. There are other ones too. There was one that was specifically used for children's theater. There were some that were that the other company, the Lord Admiral's men, used. I'm going to find you a picture so you can see what the inside of it looked like. I had a better picture. Where did it go? Yeah, here we go. Here's a picture if you want to take a look at what the inside of it looked like after they sort of converted it. But it didn't take much converting. All they had to really do was take the altar area, extended it a little, build it up a little, boom, like theater complete, right? So only, only the people who had extra money. Yeah, it does look nice, right? Could get in there. They had to light it with candles. So that was a little bit different. Of course, that also causes a problem sometimes because you have wax dripping all around. You have, a potential like source of fire in a wooden building again. But yeah, so they convert these theaters, or they convert these like religious institutions and make them into theaters, essentially. Good. Pretty clear difference, right? Okay, so we already sort of answered this about why private theaters were necessary, right? Because people had money and they wanted entertainment, and this was a way to encourage, and people would still like get together and have social lives if they could afford to, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about Shakespeare himself, all right? And I'll break it down a little bit for you about, why he continues to be pretty darn popular when we look at the theatrical canon. Let's see, who would like to read this slide? How about, okay, go
William
ahead.
Shakespeare, born in the merchant class in Stratford upon Avon,
Mhm.
educated but left early to apprentice as a butcher. Anne Hathaway, quick success upon arrival in London.
Yes, very good. So we know he was born in the merchant class based on records. We also know that because he was educated, which again is still sort of only affordable for the people who could pay for it, because you're still being educated by the people in the church. And also because we know that he had the ability to speak and write some Latin and Greek. His family may have come upon hard times, and the suspicion about that is because he did leave early to go be apprenticed to a butcher. He marries a woman named Anne Hathaway, and this is a pretty big scandal because not only is she 8 years older than he is, but she is far below his social station. So he's like sort of up here with the merchant class, and she's down here. She's just the father or the daughter of a farmer, right? She doesn't really have a lot of money to her name. So why do you think they had to get married? You had to guess. Help each other out. It wasn't as nice of an arrangement as that, Yolanda, but that's a nice thought. They were forced. That was definitely probably part of it, because of the conservative nature of the area. Come on, somebody. Yolanda's doing all the work here. Y'all aren't pulling your weight. Giving you some more hints. Oh, I shouldn't say she was 8 years older than he was. Oh, Jaden, if only. Yeah. No, it was probably because they had been caught in some way, or perhaps because she found out that she was pregnant, because they end up having 3 kids in a very short period of time. And then he's like, see ya, Stratford upon Avon. I'm going to London to become a famous playwright. No, I'm sorry. I meant that she was 8 years older than he was. My apologies, Jordan. So um, so he leaves, and their relationship isn't so great. We know this for a few reasons. The first thing is that if you ever read any of his sonnets, he talks about two people primarily in his sonnets, especially the ones about love. The first person is that he dedicates a lot of his sonnets to a dark lady who was probably a Black woman. And then he also dedicates his sonnets to a young man. So he definitely did not stay faithful to Anne when he was in London. We also know this because in his like will, he leaves her his quote second best bed. And it was like customary at the time that you would like put your marriage bed to your like husband or wife in your will. So he sort of takes like a last minute dig at her even then. Yeah. So it wasn't like, you know, a super great relationship that they had, that's for sure. So he gets to London, and within about 3 years, he's pretty successful. Richard III is his first play that they put on in London. And basically it happens to be because of connections. He happens to connect with sort of the top tragedian and the top clown. And clown was the term at the time for someone who was like the star in comedies. So he sort of like hooks up with that theater troupe and gets pretty successful pretty quickly. And the other reason why he becomes successful so quickly is this new genre of play that he begins to write called histories. What do you think those plays are about, if you just had to guess? Yeah, history. Yeah. They're not trying to fool you, right? They're about history, but they're specifically about people who were important kings and queens. And they're also written in a way to promote the Tudor family, which is the family of Elizabeth I, right? And she's the queen in power. I'm putting this in the chat. So this obviously like appeals to her, right? She wants these stories about her family that make her family look good to be told. You know, it makes her seem like a very powerful queen. The other thing that he does a lot with these plays, and that's why I say that he's a businessman, is that, you know, he's writing to appeal specifically to Elizabeth, to the point where her favorite character actually dies in the end of a play. And she asked him to write a play about this character, and his name is Falstaff. And so he does it. He's like, okay, well, it doesn't matter that he's dead. I'm going to go ahead and write a comedy about this guy because you love him so much, called The Merry Wives of Windsor. So he essentially writes like some of the world's first fan fiction for Elizabeth, because she asked him to and she's the queen, and you're not going to say no to the queen, right? He does a very similar thing to James the First. Yeah, we finally have a big comedy. It's true. He does a very similar thing for James the First, who takes the throne after he becomes king after Elizabeth dies. And he's from Scotland. He's very interested in the occult. He, you know, comes into power at like a really sort of tumultuous time because the plague is like raging through London. So they take their troupe to the castle outside London that James was in, and they basically perform Macbeth, a play that takes place in Scotland, I missed the C, and is all about the occult and witches, right? All the stuff that James I loves. They take it to him and perform it for him so that he will essentially like back them, right? And that's why I say like he's also like a very good businessman, because he knows how to appeal to the people in power and get them to support him both like monetarily and I mean like financially, but also like to just have their name supporting his plays. Okay, so we're gonna watch another little video. This is only like almost 3 minutes. Oops, I'm gonna rewind it. Start it at the beginning if it doesn't automatically do so. This is about the original pronunciation of Shakespeare. So you can sort of hear what we think the English language sounded like when Shakespeare was alive. So go ahead and hit play on that now. Okay, so our discussion on Nearpod. So what do you think about the OP? Were you able to sort of understand it or no? Go ahead and share your thoughts on the Collaborate board. Not really? Okay, that's fair. You were confused, okay. If you couldn't hear it due to lag, you might have to just watch it later when you're on a better connection. I understand that, like, especially those of you who are here at school. You can also just post in the chat, like, what do you think about this idea of trying to figure out what English sounded like when Shakespeare was writing? Your picture is good, Jaden. Yeah, it is interesting, this idea that they're working like from the text and using the text to figure out like with the rhyme scheme. You want to hear more people talk like that? Yeah. Well, it definitely sounds exaggerated to us now, and it might even, like what they're doing now, sound exaggerated than it did then, right? I'm going to go ahead and post a little thing for you in the chat too to take a look at. When we talk about Shakespeare, there are a lot of things that you're going to see, especially if you take any more English classes, about, how he's sort of overdone, he's sort of used too much as like an example of, theater and et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that I do like to emphasize is what he did do, like it's undeniable what he did for the English language, right? So that article is the 422 words that Shakespeare invented. That's true. If you bring that accent back, we would sound funny to them, and they would sound funny to us. Yeah, like they wouldn't probably be able to understand us, right? Just as like you might not be able to understand them. If you could like get in a time machine and go back to London, you'd think like, oh, well, it's English, right? But surprise, right? They probably wouldn't be able to understand you that well either. So just to sort of set things up for what we're going to talk about next time, okay? So next time we're going to be in France for the Restoration and the Royal Era, okay? So James the First, right? So it's Elizabeth I to James I to Charles I. So Charles I becomes king. And remember how I said that there was like all this tension between the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church? Well, that is going to come to a head in the English Civil War. And Oliver Cromwell is going to create this big army. He is going to defeat Charles I, and he's actually going to behead him in 1649. And so essentially, Charles's son, who will become Charles II, and pretty much everybody who could, like the upper echelon, all the rich people in London, they got to get out of there, right? Because they're next on the chopping block. So where do they go? They go to France, right? France was pretty much their closest ally previously. They call up Louis XIV, and Louis XIV is just like a huge, basically a frat boy with a lot of money. He's just been having like a party every night. And they're like, Louis, help us. What can we do? And he's like, come over and we're going to have like the best sleepover of all time. And that's basically what they do. They're going to be there while Charles grows up. They're going to be there for like 14 years. And while they're there, basically, they're going to be going to French theater. So that's why it's called the Royal Era, because it's all the stuff that's happening in France during that time. And then it's called the Restoration, because when Charles is when he finally comes back to France and he sort of takes back his throne, he will bring all that French theater and all that influence with him back to England. Okay. Any questions about anything today? I don't have an exit ticket for you today. I do want you to take a look at what you got on the history test. Okay. So that if you did not get a good score, if you did not do the history test, it is open for submissions. I would encourage you to study and take the test, especially if you got a bad score the first time, right? Please study, take it again. I will be in my office hours from 3 to 4 today. So if you want to come stop in, ask me some questions, just hang out with me while you take the test, you can do that, okay? But that is all that I have for you today on Wednesday, we're going to go to France and we're going to have a whole lot of fun with Louis XIV. And that's it for me. So I will see you on Wednesday. Have a good evening. Have a good Tuesday. And remember to check that history test grade, okay? Bye, Jennifer. Bye, Yolanda. Bye. Victoria at Ziri, can I do anything for you? You okay? Okay. I know you just got back and I know your internet is messed up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the classroom. However, if you have any questions, I know your internet is flaking out on you, shoot me an email, okay? And we'll talk about it.